Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News. It is Monday, October 6th, 10:19 a.m., and greetings from South Florida. We're going to talk about something that we've had discussions before. We actually had a very good interview back when I was doing this on my own with a reverend discussing God in an ungodly world, which is what we have been developing around ourselves as the most ungodly of worlds. If you told somebody back in the 1100s today would be what it is today, they would probably set you on fire in the town square. But now that we are watching the Pope in the Vatican talking all of his shit, and the Archbishop of Canterbury soon to be talking all of her shit, and none of it has to do with the propping up or revitalizing of the Catholic Church or the Anglican Church. One has to wonder what is going to happen to these two big juggernauts when the inevitable collapse is near. It'll take a little while to wind out the financials and the property values, but in generally speaking terms, this is pretty much the end. They'll tell you that the new Archbishop of Canterbury is in her 60s. What can she possibly do? Oh, I don't know. Destroy the rest of the Anglican Church. And the same with the quote unquote, the American guy, the working class guy who is the Pope in Chicago. In Vatican, who basically has nothing good to say about America in general, this president in particular, and is an open doors policy person, and most wholeheartedly was involved in the fiasco that was the push of illegal immigrants across the southern border with the help of Catholic charities. But that is beyond what we're talking about now. There's shows upon shows about the bullshit that goes on with the big two organized Christian religions. The Orthodox have always pretty much stayed out of it, and that's why more people are going to Orthodox. They're going to non-denominationals. Down here, Calvary Chapel is a very big one. Things like that, where they're just teaching the Bible. Granted, the money's still moving around. And of course, the Joel Osteens and garbage people like that. But what is one to do when the originals have not only tripped, but are falling flat in their face into a bucket of shit? So, since their embracement of DEI, it's been a rapid transition from God's word to Karl Marx's word, pretty much. But let's just go through it, and you can decide on your own, because once again, we are not doctrine based, although there are so many things going against these two particular ones because of their worldwide influence. And we'll just go through this, and then you can see what we're talking about. If there are any questions, well, we gotta say like, subscribe, whatever. You can DM us at anything, and we'll get back to you with information if you desire. If you have a separate take on it and you want to be included in future things, go ahead. We do not do these fake debate shows because all they are guys yelling over each other. It's kind of stupid. You don't get anything done. And just being clever doesn't mean you're right. And that includes guys on the conservative side too. A number of people have realized that people on the quote unquote right were just clever debaters and not actually interested in the doctrine or the movement, like Tucker Carlson, like what's her name? The girl. Like all those people who just were in it for a buck and are now moving around like, lost fish in a barrel. So let's take it from the beginning of when this all went bad. Beginning in the mid-20th century, okay, both Rome and Canterbury, which is the capital of Anglican faith, began replacing the vocabulary of revelation with the vocabulary of sociology. And this is all examples. We have a document on this at southfloridaconservative.com. Please go over there. It's all annotated. So when you say we're lying, you're just tragically full of shit and can't read the English. Okay. So mercy, the term for mercy was replaced with inclusion. Justice became equity. And accompaniment, a word that used to mean walking beside someone toward God became walking beside them toward nothing at all. By the 2020s, both of the hierarchies were indistinguishable from the secular NGOs they once inspired. They preached climate politics instead of creation, identity instead of sanctity. The altar was emptied to make room for press conferences, things of that nature. They were going down the road and going down it fast. The timeline of surrender is astonishing. 1960s, Vatican II opened the church to modernity. I always had a problem with that word. In the same decade, the Episcopal Church redefined ministry as social justice. Those of you who don't understand what the Anglican or Episcopal or African AME church is, they are all part of the Anglican Communion or whatever they call it, which comes from the Church of England. The Church of England exists solely because Henry VIII could not get a divorce under the Roman Church. Therefore, he changed it. There is absolutely, regardless of what they're going to tell you, no difference between the two, except the Pope is no longer in charge, the King is in charge, and the Archbishop of Canterbury is the mouth of God. That's the difference between the Anglicans and the Roman Catholics. All right. They usually follow each other down the road to hell. By the 1980s, no outcasts became the Anglican slogan, while Rome quietly flooded diocesanal tribunals with annulments. You are allowed to have an annulment in the Catholic Church, which means the marriage really wasn't there for the right reasons. And this comes in later. By 2016, the Amoris Laetitia had turned communion into a case-by-case conversation. Who could get communion and who couldn't? To this day, as of 2016, right, a divorced woman probably could not take communion and probably could not be buried in a church cemetery on church property versus what the gays could get up to. All right. And by 2023, the fiducia supplicants had opened the door to same-sex blessings while the Church of England followed suit. So that's 2023, bang, same-sex marriage in the Catholics, while the Church of England followed suit. And once again, they left that on a person by person, so that way they wouldn't get too many people upset. Doctrinal pluralism wasn't a theory anymore. It was policy. The West's cathedrals are still lit, but the light inside them wasn't for faith anymore. It was a fluorescent bureaucracy, which anyone who had been around for 40 or 50 years had seen it going that way. If you had been to a seminary, I had been out to one, I think it's been sold since St. Charles Borromeo. Was it St. Charles Borromeo out near Villanova? And at one point, when my great uncle was there as a novitiate, I forget how many hundreds, if not 1,000 people were there to become priests. When we went out there to look at the property, because they think it's since been sold to a real estate developer, because they had to pay for A, sex crimes, B, it's a big piece of property when you only have 10 people coming in. Most of them were coming in from out of the country to become priests. So very large property. It was getting that kind of disco vibe when I walked through the place. And some of the older guys had told you and reaffirmed it's pretty much how the thing was running. So just don't go to the showers on the third floor and you will be safe. Okay. The new creed is simple. Diversity equals all beliefs are equal, even when they contradict. And that means the Bible, the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of Old Testament God, all beliefs are equal. Equity equals the hierarchy is unjust. Grace must be redistributed. Figure that out, right? Inclusion, repentance is optional, affirmation is salvation. This is how the Church of God became the Church of Good Feelings. The faith that once saved souls now manages optics, and the shepherds now hire consultants because they had let the horse out of the barn with no way to put it back. we'll talk, I guess we'll talk about it now because it's going to come up at some point. Couldn't really cover it. Everyone's always afraid to talk about this issue. And the point of the matter is for all you biblical scholars that also have some history about you, I believe we can point to the 11 to 1200s when the celibate priest deal came up, right? I think it may have been asked at one point before that to go that way, but while it was still in its infancy, rabbis did get married. I believe that the idea was that the apostles moved about the earth, so they had no time to do it in general, but you always have the Mary Magdalene story, which is somebody's story for another time. And gays have always been with us. Let's just go that way. The gays have always been with us. Lesbians and gays, those two. We're going to stick with the two big ones, the two important ones, the two that are incontrovertible, that it's just a mental illness or something like that, which you get with the other ones. That being said, denying the flesh has always been a major issue in the church. To suborn your desires, to circumscribe your desires and keep them penned up and not act like an animal out in public. Now, the problem that you have is they'll tell you that you're not supposed to lie with a man and this and that and the other thing, and it's in the Bible, and it is. But if you don't do it, what can we do to punish you for thinking about it? Right? Is somebody really that if they never go forward and do it? If they never go out there and say we should do it, if they never go out and ride a high heel shoe down Broad Street with their ass hanging out saying, I'm doing it all the time. That is what they had with the church, the Roman system. All right. There were always gays in it. It's just how it is. There's always one in however many, right? The percentage is probably the new percentage is a lie, but the old percentage was probably true. Well, whatever that number was. Same with lesbianism, right? And the thing was, if you were involved in the church and you were not going and acting on your interests and desires, there was no problem with you. And that was what was changed going into this new edgy version of Christianity. Okay. So it wasn't that they were, you shouldn't do it. It's bad. But if you don't tell us about it and you don't act on it, then we can go past it. Because I don't know. If you don't run up to me and tell me this story, I don't know. So now I don't have to act on it. You got it? And people say, oh, that's invalid, that's false. People who tell you that are trying to get you to do something you don't want to do, and they're lying to you to think you're heroic by doing it. Every one of these film festivals where the guy comes out of Thanksgiving to his family, they all end in tears. Nobody hugs their gay son or their lesbian daughter at Thanksgiving in front of everybody and says, this is what I really wanted. It's a Christmas miracle that you've done this, Bob or Jenny or whoever the fuck you are. This is what we needed to do. We needed to drag your life experience under the nose of everybody, including relatives we only see once a year, so that you feel A, important that you did it, or B, damage control that somebody won't throw you out into the snow because there's people there. So you didn't do it for the feelings of the people involved, right? Don't kid yourself. I worked a few of these. I've seen this done before. Don't kid yourself. It's bullshit, right? But the DEI people, knowing the same thing that I knew and the same thing that you are now aware of, said, all we have to do is get them comfortable with the fact that we're going to go forward with this. Even if they don't want to do it themselves, there are other people who may want to do it. That doesn't mean that they're going to be great priests. The deacons, nobody had a problem with that. I had a deacon in high school. I'm pretty sure he died of AIDS, right? Pretty sure. So we had like two or three die in my high school or around my high school. I can't say that because then I'll get sued. But somewhere in my high school years, two or three people from my school died of AIDS that were teachers or associated with the church. But they all had pneumonia. So no, they didn't die of AIDS. Okay. That's what I'm trying to get to on this whole point of how the erosion was able to really get in there. Okay. So in 2019 at the Amazon Synod, okay, this was the fertility goddess Pachamama thing where the Pope was going out there with these little fertility goddesses and this and that and the other thing. And the Vatican called it symbolic inclusion. We will include animist deities in our pantheon because God is God, but God likes other people's gods too, which is not true and is a direct violation of the Ten Commandments. I mean, even I know that, right? But the guys that are running the show, once you're the head of the Vatican, you're in charge of a vast fortune of money. You get all the hot guys, you get all the hot girls, you get all the cool cars, you get to dress like a pimp from 1200 BC, right? You can do all those things. And all you have to do is dumb shit like this and then bless a block of ice, which is what the new Pope did at the Raising Hope for Climate Justice Conference, where he laid his hands on a block of Greenland glacial ice, praying for the planet and praying against the United States, which is what he does a lot of. Okay, go look up his comments against the United States, his immigration policy, comments against the United States as it refers to Donald Trump. He is a global scumbag. He cares nothing about the church. He probably knows the minimal amount of scripture. I don't think you're going to see a lot of enlightened books. He is not Francis of Assisi. He is not Saint Bonaventure. He is not anybody useful to the world. And I know it sounds harsh to say this, but this guy and the woman in England have their hands on the minds of a lot of people who are not predisposed to Marxism, but are becoming Marxists because the church's teachings have twisted to the side of leftism, right? That's what's going on there. So they're out there doing this, right? And this is a language of activism. This is nothing about how to make yourself better to go to heaven. This is nothing about how you can be more thoughtful with your wife and children or your husband and children or anybody and children, because that was the joke with allowing the same-sex wedding. There was already legal documentation put in place to allow gay people to get together in a marriage-like situation for the facts of the legality of splitting up real assets, which is what it was all about. If you talk to older gay guys and lesbians, was we've been together for 25 years. We have some property that is jointly held, but I will not get the benefits of certain things because one seemed to always have a much better job than the other one. I don't know why that is. And if the poorer one would die second, they were going to be in trouble with the tax man and this, that, and the other thing. You'd have to have corporations. It became involved for the average gay couple or lesbian couple. Then they said, okay, we've got that. Now we have to take it to the religious people and force them to marry us in their church. This is when you started seeing these apostolic churches telling you it's Satanism. Okay, I don't know if anybody remembers when that all went on, that it was Satanism to have gay marriages in the church. Well, in their way of thinking, it was because most people assert that satanic rituals are usually the same ritual of a Christian or Judeo or Christian organization, but reversed, right? And the Christian wedding, marriage, is to put a man and a woman together. The idea is procreation, build a family. If you put together two people, and this is why annulment, which I mentioned earlier, comes in. If two people get together and somebody is barren, as we'll use the old term, this is going back before in vitro fertilization. I got married to you. You can't have children, or somebody can't have children. I get the marriage annulled based on non-consummation. Not that somebody didn't put, D's and V's, but that babies did not come out from that situation. That is why Henry VIII started his whole terror campaign and formed the Anglican Church. He needed to have a male child. All right. This is all simple stuff. You just have to remember it. It's a lot. We had to go over it for a couple of days to get it straight, because my problem with the Catholics is the rape murder festival that they encouraged on the southern border for the last 6 years. So, and I am theoretically Catholic. I had a great uncle who was a priest. I had a great aunt who was a nun. I had another one who was a priest. I understand the industry. I understand what it used to be. I understand what it is now. Okay. And it is an industry. When that Church Militant used to be a website, they had great stuff. Great stuff. These are people that really wanted the word of God out there, and instead they got the Pope, right? So when we're talking about this hypocrisy, while we're preaching morality to nations, right? They're telling us what to do in the United States. Both of these churches are drowning in their own sins. The Catholic hierarchy concealed abuse for decades from Boston to McCarrick, billions of dollars in settlements. All those children's lives destroyed. And if you think that having sex with a child, they're going to walk it off in some Vince Lombardi fashion, ain't going to fucking happen. You molest a child and it's over. It will come back and bite people at all kinds of angles. The Anglican Communion had its own problem. The IICSA report in Britain, the John Smith cover-ups, and the endless talk of learning and listening that fixed nothing. In fact, when I was in Philadelphia years ago, I believe, I can't mention the name because I don't want to say the wrong name, but Benison was the high-ranking guy, and it turned out he was kicked out of the church from his office because his brother had been engaged in a long-term molestation of an 11-year-old, which he knew about. This is all in the newspaper, which he knew about, but said nothing because he knew it would harm his ability to become a bishop. So he let his brother molest a child for years. For years. His brother was also a priest in the Episcopal Church. Let them abuse this kid for years because he didn't want to have that problem on him. And when it started to break, he immediately jumped onto the gay bandwagon, got the votes he needed, and became a bishop. He was kicked out, and then he was brought back because by then, that community of religious cosplaying lesbians and gays had taken over a majority section of the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church has been splitting up for years. Their issue, of course, was trying to divest the funds because the AMEs, I think it was the AMEs, could be wrong. I mean, I'll take them out, but an African Anglican organization, the Episcopal Church and the Anglicans had their funds kind of twisted up together. And there have been a number of lawsuits in the state of Virginia because the hardcore of the Episcopal Church is in Virginia, and they wanted nothing more to do with these guys. So these cosplayers turn around and say to them, hey, fuck you. We've got the money because we're the church heads. Even though your grandfather put the money in, we're keeping the money. We're keeping the lifestyle. We don't care if we preach to 6 people. You aren't getting your money back. And that's what they did. And that's when, if you didn't already know that they were full of shit, you knew it at that point, right? So that's a money scandal locally. Internationally, you had the Vatican bankers playing hedge funds with parish donations, right? They had cardinals on trial for embezzlement. Anglican commissioners were sitting on billions while churches closed by the week. And at the border, my favorite part, Catholic charities and Episcopal migration ministries was taking federal money under the term that they were out there helping everybody under the banner of compassion. They acted as subcontractors for the Biden regime, and they were helping to manage migration pipelines through the Darien Gap into Central America and into the southern border, facilitating the movement of illegal migrants, which also was included in that various drug cartels and other crime organizations. The death toll of females coming up that Darien Gap is unknown. The death toll of children coming through the Darien Gap is unknown. The level of sexual assault leading to murder or sexual assault leading to human trafficking is unknown coming through there. These two organizations, as well as this other Jewish group that was officially run by somebody else, but was really run by the head of Homeland Security at the time, the shitbag, they can never get him prosecuted. He was the last one. He ran a Jewish group that was theoretically put together to get Jewish refugees out of Europe away from the Nazis. They moved down there and did the same thing. Okay. There's a number of people who spent time reporting totally detailed information on how these groups operated down there and the deaths and everything else, to be pushed aside by assholes like Tucker Carlson and all these other guys to basically say, oh, it's bad, but it's not as bad as you think it is. The Chinese are coming. Right? So this was all done under the banner of compassion. These are the shepherds that are no longer feeding the flock, right? They are running the logistics of a socialist machine, and they are not worried about who dies, who is hurt, who is morally destroyed. None of that matters to them, because they do not believe in the doctrine that they are, these people are talking, oh, why hasn't the American military turned on Trump? They made an oath. How about every one of these people at the church that are pastors or priests or whatever the hell they are, bishops? They made no commitment to God because they don't believe in a God. It's easy to say, oh, in the old days, people weren't that smart. It wasn't the question of being smart. And this is what people don't understand about taking an oath or making anything like that. You are saying that if there is an almighty person, you are confident enough in yourself that you will lie against that. Now, when you are proved to have lied under that situation, does anybody trust you ever again? I wouldn't trust anybody, right? They'll say, well, God's not real, so it was a meaningless oath. It wasn't meaningless to everybody, and it was implied that the oath was made knowing there would be dire consequences. All right? So the church has always known about this whole issue with human desire, with the homosexuals and everything else, and that it was complicated. Do not conflate the sexual identity of the gays and lesbians with the child molesters. If you learn anything out there about the psychology of the two, one does not give you the other. Okay? It doesn't happen that way. We are going to stick strictly with this issue. And I was told not to cover the one part, which is, I think, the most damning part, because we don't want to be sued by every organization on the fucking planet. So I'll tell you that story some other day. But, if you're going to look at your scriptures, scripture condemned that whole thing, men lying with other men, blah, blah, blah. They didn't care about the women, I guess, but it's always men lying with men, not the inclination. So don't do it. If you're inclined to it, don't do it. Celibacy gave every man or woman, no matter what their struggle is, a path to holiness. That's the implied thing that we're saying here. You follow the rules and you can still go forward. Buddhism does a good job of it. If you're ever at a real Buddhist temple, you'll see they realize there are those problems, especially in the third world, where the younger guys are in with the older guys, and they'll keep the lights on and this and that and the other thing, because they don't know what everybody's capable, or they do assume what everybody's capable of. Okay. So, like I said, celibacy for every man or woman, whatever the struggle, path to holiness, don't act on it. And that worked for centuries. Like I said, 11 to 1200 AD is when they went with the celibacy aspect, because we had too many issues with land titles and, I'm a bishop, my son should be the bishop, like the Borgia popes, that type of thing. So in the modern era, repression became pathology and confession was replaced with self-expression. Now imagine just the moral clarity of having a confessional where you can go and say anything, anything, anything. This is not what goes on where I'm talking to you right now. This is not a confessional, right? Nobody is forgiven at the end of my conversation. If you are of the faith that understands what's going on in the confessional, you've gotten it out, you know it's wrong. Okay, don't do it anymore and do this, this, and this, right? So this is what's happened instead. You have the self-expressionists. Seminaries began preaching authenticity instead of obedience. This is when, like I said, 60s and so, don't go to the third floor for the shower. The idea of hidden struggle was out. The idea of public pride was in, right? Once reproduction and lineage were no longer part of marriage, the commitment itself began to evaporate. Why would you get married if you're not going to have children? Right? Seriously, why would you get married if you were not going to have children? If you were of that level of whatever commitment, that is commitment. That's not the one of the stages of love that the Greeks would tell you about, right? Which is an entirely different thing. The sacrament of marriage was now converted to become a social contract for companionship. And the church, instead of resisting the trend, started to celebrating it as progress. They were told, let all these other people have their thing at our church. It's good for the bottom line. We'll be able to charge them for it, which was bullshit. That's not what you're supposed to be thinking about when you're running a church. And if you can't afford the church, well, then maybe you have to lose it. Maybe something was going wrong. Maybe somebody wasn't delivering the message that was necessary, right? I worked at a couple of them. My mother was much more what would the term be? The offices of the church were things that she was involved in. I already had a problem with having heard a lot of the stuff, even going to the ones that she went to, because of the open bullshit that occurred. The Catholics had been so far behind me at that point, having dealt with them again in a business manner, that I did not want to see them on a Sunday as well. All right. But that's neither here nor there. So we know that there are problems, right? And what you would want to see happen, and these are things that will not happen, unfortunately. They need to re-theologize mercy. They have to understand what mercy means. Okay. I don't care if you liked Charlie Kirk or hated Charlie Kirk. I'm only bringing this up because this is recent. Today's the 6th. In and among itself, you should have some etiquette for the wife and the kids. You may not like the man, right? Maybe you don't like the man. Maybe you thought the man was great. Or the worst that I'm seeing now is the people who didn't really have anything to like about him or hate about him, but are now kissing all this ass because they think there's an opportunity in it for them, like Nick Fuentes and those guys, right? They're out there. Oh, yeah, well, we would have come to some understanding. No, you wouldn't have. But that's just my take on your scammy behavior. And there's a lot of people that are like that. But there is such a thing as being the bigger man, it's the victory versus defeat. You've defeated him, right? Be magnanimous in your victory. Allow the family to grieve and take the body and go. Socialism cannot allow that. They cannot show mercy. Mercy cannot be shown to people who have not prostrated themselves prostituted themselves before the altar of DEI to be crushed completely. That is not a form of mercy. That is a form of revenge. That is a form of reinforcing an ideology through just that, blinding force and terror. Okay. You would like to restore a hierarchy amongst the church. You can't do that because of the way the bishops have all been appointed. We could have had a worse, believe it or not, we could have had a worse pope than we have, because the other guys are even worse, right? But there's nowhere to go and say, hey, these guys are all bringing us down. There's no back room. There's no inspector general. There's none of that stuff, right? Do they need to close the DEI offices and start funding evangelization? Of course they should. They're not going to do it. I think that they would start to wonder about what's going on in the United States if all of a sudden they were hit with taxes, because they have not proved to be a beneficial help to the people of the United States anytime in the last 40 years. Churches were not taxed in the old days to prevent a mono religion from occurring. Pretty much that was what a lot of it was about. You could tax a church out of business. The churches can't be taxed out of business because they aren't taxed. They get them sometimes, I think, on the real estate holdings, but not that often. However, knowing that right now in the United States, the American Roman Catholic Church was divided off into itself, probably for legal reasons, under the child molestation charges that were broadly applied throughout the country to keep the Vatican from having to cough up any money, right? So, like I said, there are things they could do to bring people back to them. They will not do it. They will therefore have to fail. These are the things that are being done at the other churches. Make worship sacred again. Hate to say it that way, but it's true. Make God God again, right? Use it as a defining role in your life. People say, oh, you use a lot of profanity, this, that. Yeah, I do. I got whatever. Tell me you have Tourette's, right? You cocksuckers. So doesn't mean you don't believe in God. That was just a thing, you know? There's Muslims that drink. There's Muslims that do a lot of other things. Doesn't mean they don't believe in their God, right? But that's neither here nor there. We need to realize that without the Ten Commandments, without an organized religion, without things like that, you are leaving the younger impressionable people and older impressionable people to the tender mercies of socialism. Socialism will become their God. And then you will be in a world of shit. So, that's that situation. But when one world collapses, as they say, another one rises. The Orthodox churches, the Greek and all those that have been around forever, have been growing quietly larger. All right. They are old school. They are first millennium. They are an island of coherence in a storm of confusion. If you have never been to one, and I can say this once again, when I was younger, I always go back to when I was younger. I went to Ukrainian Orthodox, I guess it was, Ukrainian Catholic, whatever they were, for 3 or 4 years because they were cheaper than the Romans. We didn't have a lot of money, and my mother wanted me to go to Catholic school because the city of Philadelphia public schools were garbage cans. And the Catholics raised pretty much everybody back then before they were taken apart by the charter schools and, of course, the sex crimes and all that stuff. So these guys are out there, the Calvary chapels, the this, the that, the storefront chapels, the converted warehouses, in some cases where they can, buying the defunct Episcopal and Catholic churches up. Okay, they're discovering what faith without permission feels like. It's not about a committee. It's not about a synod. It is scripture. It is music. It is conviction. It is a family event. If you go there for the church service, you stay there for the breakfast or the lunch, you talk to whoever it is a respite from having to deal with the shit bags that you're going to have to deal with for the rest of the week. Enjoy it for what it is. Hopefully it's a wholesome occasion. I can't go out there and run churches for all of you people, right? Take it for what it is. If you don't like it, go to a different one. That's the good thing. Vote with your feet because you can't change the two churches we're talking about from the outside. They have enough money. They have enough committed clergy. They are ships unto themselves. Let them crash, right? Hate to say it because they give away their places to the Muslims, and then the Muslims wreck the interiors, and all that value, all that faith, all that money, all that craftsmanship goes right out the door. So, going long enough, DEI promised that we're going to have renewal without empathy. It was going to bring in all the people who felt oppressed and free them from oppression by oppressing everybody else. They were going to bring them in, the great replacement, as the Dutch would say, and replace the real faithful with a bunch of damaged people who are much easier to control, who are not going to have any really big questions about the religion, who are not going to have any really big demands as long as I tell you that you're great. And that is how these things are going to operate. When transitional institutions are out there have now become permanent, one has to look into what they're part of. And DEI, even though we're going to have to eradicate it, is kind of a quasi, what would be the term? It's taking root, but it's not completely rooted. So we still have a chance to eradicate it. And what happens is when these institutions trade their revelations for reputations, sounds kind of whatever, but that's when God's going to find a new vessel. So that's about it for now. Sorry, I went longer than I had to, but there are a lot of things going on with this whole subject. Like I said, the whole issue of the who, what's, and where's, the issue of what are the real sins, all those things can be covered at a later date. And that's about all for now. Have a good Sunday afternoon. Talk to you later on.